Hello, this is BFCookies56, and this is my 8th Minecraft Forge modding tutorial in 1.11, and we're going to be doing GUIs this time. So this tutorial is just going to be basic GUIs that you open maybe with a block or an item or even a keybind. Not that we've done keybinds yet, but the next tutorial will be on GUIs on the HUD, so just like the hotbar, how that renders on the HUD and stuff like that. We're gonna add something like that, maybe like a health bar or a MP bar, whatever you want, or something completely different. And then after that, we're gonna be doing a tutorial on containers. So that's for things like chests that have slots. So that's not necessarily GUIs, because this will basically cover the GUI part of containers, but it kind of relates to it anyway. So let's get started. So the first thing we need to actually do, even before creating the GUI, well, we probably should create the class first, but we'll put this in. I'll make a new package called client, and then I'll put it in the GUI. And we're gonna call this GUI tutorial. That'll do. And it's gonna extend GUI screen, so we'll do that. And we want that. But for now, we'll just leave that like that. So to actually open a GUI is very easy, at least on the client side. So there's two ways to open a GUI. There's the server-side one, which you'd use for containers, where on the client side it will display the GUI, the extra GUI, because that's client side. But then on the server side, it will open the container. We're not doing containers right now, so we're going to open the GUI only on the client side, which is super easy to do, but of course we've got to make sure we're doing it on the client side, because if we try to open a GUI on the server side, it will crash because it's a client side thing. So we're just gonna add it to our item, I guess we could. And so right now we have this, and that's only on the server side when it's not remote. So if we put an else here, and we're gonna do Minecraft dot get Minecraft, and then display GUI screen, and then new GUI tutorial. And we don't have any parameters because we haven't a constructor to have anything, so that's what we need to do. That will open this GUI, which currently is nothing, so it will just be blank when we open it. And yeah, so it's very easy to display a GUI. Just make sure to only do this on the client side, because it's a client side method. Using Minecraft.getMinecraft, you should only ever do on the client. So keep that in mind. So now that we've actually got it opening, we don't have a lot here. What I'm going to do, first of all, is put our texture. So I got a texture here. It's just like a book with some button textures. So when creating a GUI texture, there's a very strange limitation where GUI textures have to be 256 by 256. Even if you've got a tiny little thing at the corner, the actual image size needs to be 256 by 256. So if you need more space, either make another texture or try to fit it in. Like you can put multiple textures in one, and I will show you how you can use one texture but have multiple images on it and use them correctly. Because if we were to just render this entire image, then we'd get these buttons textures here as well, which we wouldn't want. So we have this texture, and I'm gonna put it in the resources folder. So let's go to our textures, and I'll create a new folder here, and we'll just call it GUI. And I'll just put it here. So we got book.png, that's fine. And in fact, I'll open that one up now that we've moved that. Now I'm going to keep this open because we will need to know the dimensions of our main texture here, which is that, but I'll look at that once we're actually there. So we got our texture there. You can, while I'm doing a book, you could do anything you like. When we do actually do containers, basically we'll just have the image with the inventory and everything in it, and it will be done exactly the same way. So, because the position of the slots and everything is done in the container rather than the GUI, so that will obviously be covered when I do the containers. Anyway, so there's a lot of methods in GUI screen that some are pretty useless, but then there are quite a few important ones. So if we override some stuff, so let's find draw screen. So this method is basically the method where we're going to be drawing everything. So any textures, text we want to draw, just anything will be here. And this basically is this is where we're going to draw our texture, but this is also where the buttons on the GUI are drawn. And by default, if we go into, so if I press Control U, we actually go to the original method, and we can see here that it draws the buttons and labels. So that is done for us, but everything else we got to do ourselves. So the order that we draw things in is very important, but I'll get to that once we actually do drawing. So another method to override is initGUI. So this is simply a method that's called when the GUI initializes. Also, it's called when the window size changes. So if you maximize the window while the GUI is open, this method will be called again. And then we have action performed. Action performed is where we check if a button has been pressed. And as we see, we got the button parameter. Now, I did actually something I didn't mention here. We have the mouse X and Y parameter, so we can get the position of the mouse, which is useful for drawing tooltips, because we can draw those as well. And then we got the ticks, so that's like the rendering ticks. So if you want to do animations, you could use those. Now, there's not too many other useful ones. Key typed can be useful if we want to, detect key presses. That will work nicely. And then, of course, we got the key code that we get that we can use to check which key was actually pressed. And does GUI pause game? This is pretty simple. If you open up your inventory, it won't pause the game. But something like the pause menu obviously pauses the game, but not on multiplayer, so of course this will not be affected. if you're on a server, but could be useful. I'm just gonna say false, and then are there any others that are particularly? It's like there's a lot of things here that we're not gonna override. Like all these drawing ones, especially. Now we could actually extend update screen. Not too important. On GUI closed, pretty self-explanatory. Called when you close the GUI. So if there's anything you need to do when it closes, that'll be where you do it. Don't think we're gonna use that, but it could be useful depending on what GUI you are using, you are making even. But I think these are the main methods you'll probably end up using. And especially these two. These are like the integral ones. So to actually draw our GUI texture, we need to first of all actually get the path of our texture. So we're going to store that as a resource location. So if I make a variable up here, and we'll just call it texture, and then new resource location, and then this just takes our mod ID and then the actual path. So we have that in here, and then it is textures GUI book.png. So make sure to actually put the file extension, otherwise it won't work. And we could even make this final because we don't really need to change the texture, so I will do that. And then to actually render it is pretty easy. So we actually need to know the width and height of the texture we're going to draw. So this is 175 by 228, and I'm going to put those in variables. What was it? 228 and GUI width 175. So now that we got that, we can actually draw it. So to bind our texture, we just need to do Minecraft.getMinecraft and then render engine dot bind texture, and then we give it our resource location, which is just texture. And if we want to use another texture, then we just need to bind the texture again. So now that we got that, we just need to use a method called draw textured modal rect, which is just like a rectangle that has a texture. So it takes a couple of parameters. We've got the X and Y position on the GUI. For now, I'm just going to put it as 0, 0, but we'll get to centering it once we actually open up the game in debug mode, because it'll be a lot easier to see. And then the texture X and Y are basically the position in the texture. So when we want to draw it from this corner, but if we set it to like 175, then it will draw from here. So when we actually get to drawing these, we will use a different texture. But this texture's in the corner, so we're just going to draw from 0, 0. And then the width and height, well, we've got that. That's just the variables that we just made. And that will draw the texture in the corner of the screen, which is not where we want it, but it will draw the texture. So I'm actually going to run the game now. That's not the right thing. Let's run that in debug mode, so we can make some changes while the game's running. Can't do too much though. We're gonna have to restart the game when we get to doing buttons and stuff. It would be very nice if debug mode worked for adding methods. That would be incredibly helpful. Right, now the game's open. Let's go into our world. So, let's get our tutorial item, which actually we already have, don't we? Yeah, because it's the keyblade. And if we right click, it displays the GUI. Now this GUI is pretty massive actually. But it does display, and it's in the corner, which is not what we want. Now another thing that you may notice that we don't have with this GUI is if you open the inventory, you see how it darkens the screen in the background. Rather, this GUI doesn't. Well, basically, there's a very easy method to add, which just does it for us. So, draw default background. And if we press Ctrl F9, reload that, now it's darker. But of course our actual GUI isn't. So to get this in the center, we just need to do a little bit of maths. So I'm going to make some more variables. So the center, so in GUI screen we have width and height, so we can get the width and height of the window, which is super helpful as we can position our stuff based on that. So obviously the center is just half of the width, but that's the center from there. So while this point will be in the center, but the texture will be way off. So we just need to minus our GUI width divided by 2. Now I'll put that in brackets just to make sure that this is divided by 2 and not doing like 2 minus GUI width. That would be weird. And then we do the same thing for our Y position. So height divided by 2, GUI height divided by 2. And then if we just give our X and Y coordinates of our texture, center X and center Y, there we go, it's in the center. Now this GUI is really big, so it doesn't, it's covering, it's like almost the entire screen, but as you can see, it is in the center of the screen. If we put, let's set our GUI size to normal. There we go. So it is in the very center. Now our GUI doesn't do anything right now, it just opens like this. And the only way to close it is by pressing escape. We can change that if we want to either make a key press do it, or we could add a button to close it. Now it's actually very easy to close the GUI. We just need to display, when we, just like we display a GUI like this, instead of giving a GUI, we can actually just give it null, and that will display nothing, so it will close the GUI. Right now, we'll leave that. Probably going to add a button. Maybe we'll do the key, but let's continue with this. So, now that we've actually got something on our GUI, there's some other things we can do to this. So, if we want to draw some text on it, we can use draw string. And we just need the font renderer, which I don't... Oh no, okay, so if we didn't have the font renderer in GUI screen, we can do Minecraft.getMinecraft.fontRenderer, and there it is. But also, we have MC, which is just Minecraft.getMinecraft, our Minecraft variable. So we can do MC.fontRenderer, but we don't need to do that because we have the font renderer. So then we just need to give it some text. So tutorial, I'll just put that as the text. And then the position, so I'll use the current position we have. And then the color is basically, well, right now we'll just set that to 0000, which it should be 6, I believe, which I think is just black, yeah. So I'm pretty sure this color is just a hex code. Yeah. So if we want to set the color, we just need to find out the hex code of our color, which we can do in many different image editing programs, or you can find websites for it. We should be able to find it in Photoshop. I think it's in here. So let's say we want our text to be some terrible color like that, which probably isn't going to look too good. Then we'll use this. And now it's that purpley blue color. And right now it's in the corner. We probably don't want that. If we want to center the string, well, there's actually a method for that. But it's not going to be in the right position. But that's fine. We will just copy all of that. And in fact, I will get rid of that one. And now it's centered, but it's at the edge, which is not great. So actually a lot better way to do it is just do width divided by 2. And since this is already centered, it should be in the center, yeah. If you don't want to use this draw centered string, we could actually do the same thing, but instead of GUI width, we need the width of the string, which can be done simply by, in the font renderer class, we have a couple of things. We can also draw a string from the font renderer. And we can get the font height, but we don't need the height, we need the width. So, get string width just takes a string to get the width of it. So, the text we have is tutorial, and that will get the width of that when it's drawn in the GUI. So it will get this width. And then we need to divide that by 2. And you can see it's still in the same position, even though we didn't draw a centered string. Now, we've drawn a string, and right now it looks fine. But if you try and draw another texture, so I'm just going to draw the same thing over it. This is actually going to look weird, and what I'll do is put this lower down, just so we can see the string. Actually, I don't think that matters. Yeah, actually, yeah. So, you'll notice that the texture is not there, and in fact, it is just a bunch of letters. Well, the reason for this is that when we draw a string, it binds the font texture so it can draw the string. So when we draw a texture, the font texture is still bound. Instead, of the GUI texture. So we need to bind the texture again. And the color is completely off, which looks kind of silly. So let's fix that. So although we still got the texture bound, but the color's wrong, we can actually fix that with OpenGL. So we just use GL11. So OpenGL has a lot of things to use. We've got all sorts of different methods, and something to know about OpenGL is that we always want to basically do GL push matrix, and then when we're done using GL methods, so we'll do it after here, we want to GL11.GL pop matrix. So whenever you use the push matrix, always have a pop matrix. Have as many pushes as pops. And we can even, if this is more clear, we can put these inside brackets like this, so then you know that it's inside there. And then color 4F is basically we have 4 float values for RGB and an alpha. I believe that should reset it. Yep. And 111 is just standard, basically, like normal colors. These are a little weird how they work, because one is like, if it's 0 to 1, the colors. So if you want it to be transparent, which I don't think will work too well because we haven't enabled alpha. So if we do gl11.gl enable and then gl11.gl underscore alpha, that should work, although we have, oh right, gl11.gl disable. That still hasn't worked. What have I done? Let's get rid of those for a sec. It might actually be because we have another one. Let's just delete this. Well, you know, get rid of the first texture first of all. And then what do we need? We need to, that's a good point, we should use that. Minecraft has GL State Manager, so GL State Manager is basically like, has most of these methods, but some extra helpful ones. So we got like disable lighting, enable alpha, like without having to use all of these terms. So actually, I'll do that because, where is it in this? It's GL. Now I've got to find this one. Oh, there it is. It's just push. It's not GL. Okay. Let's. Yeah. This is a better idea. State manager. And then we'll do. This should. Yeah, it's just color. Ugh. And this should still work the same. It's basically the same methods, but a little bit friendlier actually. So now we can just do enable alpha. I think we need to enable blend as well. See, transparency is a bit pain to get working. There we go. So now we have a transparent texture. And we can make that super transparent. Set that to 0.1. You can't even see that. 0.2 maybe. Yeah, there it is. Just about. So, the order we actually draw things in is very important, because it will basically draw it in this order. So, the bottommost stuff will be the first things to draw. So, it draws the dark background over it, which is right in the background. And then we draw the string, so that's on top of the background. And then we draw this texture, which is then on top of the string. So it's... And then it will draw the buttons, but without any buttons, so it doesn't just draw anything after that. So this super is actually quite important for when we have buttons, which we will be getting to very soon. So let's actually move this back to here. We don't need to change the color unless we want to set it transparent, but we don't want to. But I will leave it here just so it is there when I put it on GitHub. And this text isn't in the right position, but it's, well, assuming we want this like at the top. So we're gonna move that down by a bit. I'll just add 10 to the Y. And yeah, that's about good. Now let's actually add some buttons. So of course, buttons in GUIs are, there's all sorts in the menus and everything. These buttons that all look the same are actually very easy to do. Minecraft has a built-in button system, so we can make buttons that have this texture and everything very easily. But I'll also be showing you how to make a button that has a custom texture, which are these buttons here. So let's first make a button like this. So I need to close the game because when we do this, debug mode won't work for the stuff we add, so I'll close that out. And first of all, we will make a GUI button variable here, and I'll just call it button1, I guess. Of course, you probably want to call it something better than that. And I'm also going to make some variables. Well, I'll make a variable right now. I'll put some caps. And this is just going to be 0. So these variables here, you don't need to do this, but I feel like it's probably a good idea to do this. Each button has a button ID, so these variables I'm going to use as the button IDs. So our first button is just going to be 0. But as you get more, you'll use the button IDs. In action performed, we check the button ID that's been pressed. So it's a good idea to have them as variables rather than just random numbers that you don't know what they are. So let's actually add the buttons. So it's the best place to add buttons is in the init GUI, because it's done once and we don't want to continuously add the buttons over and over again. We just need to do it once. So this is a good place to do it. So we have the button list, which is a variable inside GUI screen. And this is just a list of all the buttons. And I'm going to clear the button list first, just in case there's something in the button list when the GUI opens. There shouldn't be, but there could be. And we don't want that. So I'll clear it first, and then we're going to add to it, and I'm going to do button1 equals new GUI button. And then there's two different constructors for GUI button. We have the why does it do that? The button ID in both, the X and Y position in both, and then in one of them we can specify the width and height. The other one, it's just a specific width and height, which I don't actually know which one it is by default. We can look at that. That is not what I wanted to look at. Right, control, click. This one. So it's got a default width of 200 and height 20. 20 is a pretty good height to make it look normal. If you make the button too small, the texture will be cut off and it won't look right at all. And we will just put this at 0, 0 for the time being. So 0, 0, and then the width we will make 100 and the height 20. And then, oh right, I missed out the button ID. Button 1 is the button ID. And then the text is just simply the text that's on the button. Simple. So, I'll just say button. So now we've got a button there with all the positions we want. It's, well, we probably don't want 0, 0, but for the time being it's going to be there. So that will actually show the button, but it doesn't do anything right now. We can click it and it will make a noise, the default button noise, and it will, it will change color when you hover over it, all that stuff, but it does nothing. So this is what the action performed method is for. And in the action performed method, we're going to make a switch statement. And then we're going to do button.id. So this is the ID of the button that's just been pressed. And then we're going to add a case, button 1. So if the button ID is button 1, then we will do something. What are we going to do? Well, what could we do? We could maybe let's have, okay, I'm going to make a variable here, title, and by default it equals tutorial, and then we'll use the title variable here. So now we can change what the text is. So when we click this button, we'll say title equals clicked. This is not exactly very useful, but it will show that the button works. We could make it close the GUI, but I won't do that. So drawing the buttons is actually done for us. So since it's done in draw screen, we can use this super statement basically as where the buttons are. So if we have this super up here, it's going to draw in the background, which we don't want because then the buttons won't be visible. My cat's making noises. So we're going to leave this at the bottom because we want the buttons at the top. Now, there are some other things that we can do with buttons that I haven't shown, so let's actually get to that. So whenever I make a GUI, I always make a method called update buttons. So you don't have to do this, but I always feel it's quite useful to have a method that keeps up with it. So what we're going to do, every time a button is pressed, clicked, whatever, we're going to call the update buttons. And in here, we can say, so buttons have, so in button we have a bunch of things. We can change the ID, the position we can change once it's been added. So while we do set the position, width and everything here, we can then change it if we want. But some of the helpful things we have is enabled, and yeah, that's fine, and visible. So if we want to hide our button, let's just say so by default we want what I'm going to do, I'm going to say if title equals, we'll use that, if the text in the title is tutorial, then button 1 is enabled, which it will be by default, else button 1 dot enabled equals false. So if a button is enabled, you can click it. If it isn't enabled, it will be like, it will still be there, you can see it, but you won't be able to click on it, and it will be like the background is like black of the button. So that is the reason I have this method, is otherwise we'd have to put it in here, which could get messy, and every time you click a button, we want the buttons to update to make sure they're either visible or enabled, like they're the correct things. Now, before we actually get into testing that this all works, if you want to render each button that you have at different points, like maybe you have a button that you want to be behind something for some reason, and then another button in front of it, well, instead of using the super, we can just do draw button, and then it takes MC, mouse X, mouse Y, which we all have. And that will work exactly the same. But of course, if we add more buttons, we need to make sure to draw those as well. Or we could do exactly what this does, which is loop through the list of buttons and draw them. So what I'll do, in fact, is comment that out and then put button 1 draw button. And now that we've done that, let's actually run the game. And I'll run it in debug mode just in case we want to change something. Now we could actually add the same button to the list but have different values and give it a different ID. That would certainly work. And we don't necessarily have to have this in a variable, but then we can't access it as easily. So it's a better idea to have a variable for your button. And when we make a custom button, we're going to have a new GUI button class, which we're either going to make it as a class inside this class, or we'll have it as a separate thing. Probably a better idea is to have it as a separate class, so then it could be used in multiple GUIs. Let's actually get this going. Right, there we go. Our button is there. Oh, okay, that's fine. And when we click it, you can see now it's enabled equals false, and that's what it looks like when it's not enabled. If we did visible, then it would just disappear. So now it says clicked, so it does exactly what we want. Something you may have noticed is actually that clicked has like a shadow, and it looks kind of terrible. We can actually fairly easily fix that, because for whatever reason, the drawString method in GUI screen uses drawString with shadow from the font renderer. If we want to have no shadow, then we're going to have to go and use draw a string from the font renderer ourselves, and then we don't need this font renderer parameter. That should look better. There we go. No, you might want a shadow. Really depends, but generally with darker colors, especially, you don't want a shadow because it will look horrible. Not that this is a great text color anyway. But there we go. Our button. It's in the corner. If we change this to, we don't have our centered. I mean, we could have made this a variable up here, but oh well. Let's just do this. What on earth have I done? Oh, right. Now if we reload this, you'll notice it hasn't changed. That's because it's in the init GUI, so if we just maximize it, it will actually, you can see, now that the window size has changed, it's changed it. And of course the same thing would have happened if we closed it and opened it, but now it's here, so still not a great position, but it's not too much of a problem. Let's actually put it down. So again we can say, well, it's just 100 the width, so I could just do 50, but that's less clear. Probably a good idea to store as many like variables for positions and everything as you can, so that it's less magic numbers, because this, if you have a super complicated GUI, all these numbers could definitely get like confusing, because you're like, 100 divided by 2, why is that? But if you say, if you made a variable called button width, and then button width divided by 2, you know that it's the right, you know what it's doing. Did I reload that? Yeah. So now that's in the center. We're actually just going to put this at the bottom. So if I do height, and then minus, like, I'm going to say, actually, no, let's get the center Y, so that is up here. And then what we'll do is, so this is not, did I reload that? I did, didn't I? Yeah. Okay. So now it's in the center on the Y. But what we will actually, what we're going to do is not divide that by 2. So I think that's going to be off the screen. No, it won't. Yes, it will. Okay. Yeah, that's because we divided that by 2. If we just divide that, so we get the full height, because we want this to be near the bottom. There we go. Well, that's more in the center of the texture. In fact, let's just do height. Height minus, like, double the button height. Maybe. I really shouldn't be bothering with this. That does look weird on this, because of course that's a different, you're basing it off the width rather than this texture. But I won't worry about that. It's if you're actually making a GUI, you should make sure to get the positions all relative to things. Otherwise, you will only have your GUI working on certain resolutions or GUI sizes, which is not a good idea. It's definitely quite difficult to make a GUI work on every single resolution, but basing it, using the width and height variables is definitely a good idea, because then you can always make sure, at least, it's going to be right. And since the GUI can only be 256 by 256, you do have kind of like a limit, so you can't make it too huge. But of course, you don't have to use a texture. You can just make your GUI be just text and buttons if you don't need a texture. Kind of like the pause menu. We have game menu as the text, and then a bunch of buttons. And no actual texture. So you can make GUIs like that. So that's, you don't have to use a texture. There's many different GUIs you can make. Now, there are so many more things we can do in a GUI. So let's do some other simple things. So I think something that probably quite a lot of people may want to do is draw an item in their GUI. Not like for items in the slots, that's done with a container, we don't need to worry about that drawing. But just drawing like an item if you need an icon or something on here without putting it in the texture itself, because of course you can do that, but what happens if your item is animated, or you want the enchantment effect to be working on it, then you're going to need to do that. You're going to need to actually render the item and not just put the texture on here. And that's really easy to do. We just need to, I'm going to put this right at the top, we just need to get the item render, so render item, I always forget if it's item render, I think it's item renderer. It's, okay, it's render item. See, they, very similar things. Yeah, here it is. So render item and effect into GUI. If you just render item, then it won't use the effect, but see, render item into GUI. But we want the effect because that looks cool. So if we do our item stack, so we'll do new item stack, mod items, tutorial items. So I'll use our Keyblade item here, which has the enchanted effect. Of course, you can use any item you like. And we'll just use our center X and center Y. It's always a good place to start. And since we haven't added anything, as you can see, there it is. It's rendered the item as it would in the GUI, exactly the same, like in the hotbar, in your inventory. We can render blocks as well. If we do, well, let's use our block. Why not? Tutorial block, a lovely boring block. There we go. And let's say we want to render a vanilla item. Let's get lava, flowing lava. Doesn't actually render. Shall we just do lava? Probably a better idea. It's odd that doesn't render, actually. Weird. Maybe it's because of the way the block is. It's not exactly a normal block. Obsidian. That's a standard block. Should render fine. There it is. So, yeah, we can render items just fine. And if you see that and you think that's way too small, well, GL State Manager has some incredibly useful things. So let's say we want to scale our item. Well, GL State Manager is definitely useful for that. So I'm going to do this. You don't have to put brackets, but I think it's very helpful because you can see exactly where it's working, and you can actually have multiple push matrices inside each other, so that would definitely get confusing. Now you may wonder, why not just put the entire thing in? Well, okay, let's say we do scale. So this is what we're going to use to change the size. And we want to do this before we render it and not after. You change everything, then render it. Let's say we scale this by 2, so we're going to do 2 in every axis, otherwise it will be weird and stretched. And now it's massive, and the position's all screwed up. So the reason for that position screwing up, which I will explain in a sec, but first of all, so the first point, we just scaled that by 2. Let's say we want to render something else. It's going to be scaled by 2 as well. So if we put something here, though, outside of this, after it's been popped, it will be back to normal. Which is what we want. We don't, unless you want to also scale it by 2, then do that. Of course, we could then change the scale here, but it's a better idea because this will just reset everything back to how it was. So if we have multiple inside each other, then you can do all sorts of stuff. Same thing with like changing the color. Maybe we change the color in here, but then we don't want the color to be changed in the rest of it. That's the reason for it. So I hope that makes sense. Now, you may notice that the position changed, but we still want it in that position. Now, it's very weird how this works. When you scale by 2, it also scales these coordinates. So, what we need to do is do GL state manager dot translate, so we can actually change the position with translate without using these coordinates. And we can use the Z, but obviously we don't use the Z axis on the GUI because it's 2D. And I'm just going to set these to 0. So it will be 0 by default, but not really, because we are doing this, and we'll just do 0 for that. And now it's in the same position. And make sure to do this before the scale. So, kind of weird how it works, but basically, scale scales the coordinates as well, so everything is twice as big. So, center X will be double what it is, which will get that weird position that we don't want. But if we do it first, and then just have this as 0, because that's where it's going to start, and translate will move it to the right position, it works good. We can also rotate, as you'd probably expect. We can rotate, and this method, I honestly don't understand why they do it this way, but it works kind of strange. So the first parameter is the angle, and then you choose what coordinate, or what axis it rotates on. So let's say we want to rotate it by 90 degrees. And then we want to rotate it on the x-axis, why not? But not on the other axis. So we just do 1. What you'd expect, though, is to just have these 3 and say, on the x, 90, y on some other number. Like, that's what you'd expect it to be, but no. You specify the angle, and then that. Now, this number, I believe if you make it 2, it will just rotate it by 90 2 times. So if you do 0.5, it'll do 45 degrees. Kind of weird. I don't understand why they do it this way, but I mean, I guess it's easy if you want to rotate it by 90 on multiple things, or rotate it by stuff. But then you could just times. I don't understand it, but that's how it works, and you got to deal with it. And that has moved somewhere, probably because we translated it. Let's rotate it first. Might be because we've rotated it on the X. I don't know. Where has it gone? Doesn't help how dark this is. Maybe we should rotate it on a different axis, like the Y. That is strange. Z shouldn't be what we want to do. I don't know where it's gone. That's very weird. Maybe this isn't the best example to use, the item texture. If we rotate something else on the X, by the way, I did say this tutorial was going to be long, and it's already an hour. So, yeah, maybe rotating doesn't work on GUIs. No, I actually tried to do it. That's rather odd, because I would have thought that would work, but I guess not. Well, this certainly works, and that is the main thing that I was doing, scaling and translating and making sure that's right. I don't think I've ever seen any other tutorial ever mention this whole scaling thing, but yeah, it seems pretty weird that it would scale the coordinates as well, but I guess it kind of makes sense if you're scaling everything by 2. Of course, if you make one of these not 2, just 1, we'll get a lovely stretched image. There we go, well, squished rather. We don't want to do that though. You can do the same thing to text as well. If we were to move this into here, this position is going to be wrong, isn't it? Yeah. Do I want to... See, this is where you'd probably want this in a separate thing, but if we just make the position 0, 0, so it won't be plus, it won't be right at all, but, well, no, I'll make another thing here. Right, so this goes into here, and then we're going to do a, well, no, I want to copy that, and then we will use these coordinates. So basically, just for this, just move the coordinates that you have as your X and Y into here and set those to 0. If you do change those, it will offset it in weird ways, and it will probably be a lot more confusing. There we go, now it's massive. But the string width will still be the standard, the unscaled one. So possibly you want to times that by 2. So not divide this by 2, I guess. Yeah, that looks centered, I think. Could be wrong. But that is how you scale stuff and also render items. Now, another thing we can do, render hovering text, like tooltips like these, which will look exactly like these. It's actually kind of, well, more complicated than you'd initially think, but it's not too bad. So, let's get back into our GUI. And we have a method called draw hovering text. Now, we can't just do this because this will, well, it will draw it, but we need to actually check that the mouse is in the right position. So let's say we want it to hover over this. What I'll do is actually make a variable which is icon, I guess. and then set this to icon. Not icon. Icon. And then what we want to do is say if no, we'll do it outside of this. If mouse X, so this is basically we need to check the position of mouse X and Y is within the position of the icon, which is going to be a little bit more complicated because we're scaling it, but it won't be too bad, I don't think. So if mouse X is greater than or equal to, so so I'm going to try and explain this. Well, we'll see. So, of course, 0, 0 is up in the corner, as you probably know by now. Mouse X, of course, on the X-axis, and so, well, 0, 0 is actually up here. Yeah, okay. 0, 0 is up here because we're doing it based on the entire window. So, if mouse X is greater than, so as you go along to the right, the X is greater, is a higher number, and of course the left is a lower number. So we need to make sure that it is from here or greater, but of course until here, but we will get to that. So for right now, we're basically checking that we're going to check that it is basically on this part of the X-axis. We're not doing the Y yet. So we need to get the position, which is just center X. And we will put this in here. So draw hovering text. We're going to make a list here. So it takes a list of strings. So we're going to say text. We will import that. New array list. And then we will add to this list. So let's add tooltip. Every time you add, it will be a new line on the tooltip. So, but it will also wrap the text if it goes too far to the edge. So that's definitely helpful. We put 2 eyes in tooltip. Right, so we're going to draw this. So we're going to use our text list, and then the X and Y is just going to be mouse X and mouse Y because we want the tooltip to be where our mouse is. Of course, if you don't want it to be where it is, just specify a position and it will show up there. But in most cases, you want it where your mouse is because that makes sense. So now, it renders underneath because we're doing this first. We actually probably want it underneath, don't we? There we go. So now it's rendering on top. And we can see this works, but only it's as long as the mouse is past this point. So we get it here, and there we go. But see, it rendered the actual size of the icon's bigger than this image. So that's why it renders even over here, because it's actually, the position is here, and it's taken up the entire thing. I don't know if that actually made sense. But let's just check for the other positions. So where are we? Here we are. So it also needs to be less than or equal to center X and then the width. So the width of the icon is just 16 times 2, I believe. Should be. Yeah, so it's times 2 because we scaled it by 2. If we didn't scale it, would just be 16. because it's the 16 by 16 icon, because all the textures in Minecraft, all these icons in the here are all 16 by 16. Well, this is way off, but if you're doing like text, then you'd get the string width. If you're doing the actual texture, then you know the width of that. If you're doing the button, same thing. So you can get the width of the button, whatever. But we're doing it here. So what I'm going to do is get the icon display name. So that's just the name of the item, basically. And it says obsidian, yay! Right. So we have that. Now it's still only on the x-axis, so it's still going to show down here, which we don't want, and up here. So we just need to check the y, which is just the same thing. So mouse y is greater than or equal to center y, and mouse y is less than or equal to center y plus 16 times 2. So again, that's the height of this. So now it will only show within this 32 by 32 area and nowhere else, which is what we want. If we make this window big, we can see it still works. So let's say you do a tooltip. Fairly easy. This check can become confusing, but we could actually make a method that will make that less confusing. So let's say we want draw. I'm going to say draw tooltip, and then we want the list, of course, that we give it. So the lines, and then we'll just say it's gonna do that. We're not gonna bother giving it that. But then we're gonna say pos x. Well, we want an int, of course. Pos y, and then width, height. So we can now use this to basically make a similar thing here. So if we need to give it mouse x and y. Yeah, we do need to. Okay. And then we can just say if it's pos x, and then pos x plus width. Oh, I spelled that wrong. That'll be y. And then pos y, and pos y plus height. And then draw hovering text, and then lines, mouse x, mouse y, whoops. And then we can basically remove most of this and do, well, we still need this list. And then we can just give it our text, the mouse x and y, and then center x, center y, and then 16 times 2, 16 times 2. And I have done something wrong. What have I done? Oh, no, I haven't. I've just been using the wrong method. Draw tooltip. And we just simplified that. Debug mode won't work, so we just added a new method. But that's the same thing, and that's probably way more readable, actually. You can tell what that's doing a lot easier than having a check, and then we don't have to write this whole if statement every single time. So I imagine if you're going to do something like that, that's probably quite helpful. And we're actually going to need this kind of check for when we make a custom button, which... should we do that now? No, let's do it first. Text field. GUI text field. Now, this is a very weird kind of GUI element, because these are text boxes. So we're going to say, I might as well, well, okay, where could I find the text box in here? That's not quite what we want. We want the default Minecraft one, which we can find somewhere. Like here, like this one. See this text box? This is exactly what it will look like. Now, these text boxes, by default, will accept anything. And we also have to manually draw them and everything. Kind of a pain, but it's not too bad. So, let's do it in our init GUI. So, text box equals new GUI text field, which can have the same component ID, and font renderer, and then we'll just put it in the corner, and we'll make it, I guess, 100 by 20, just like the button. Maybe not exactly what we want. Let's see. That might be alright. But this won't do anything right now because we're not drawing it, first of all. So let's just draw it up down here. Text box dot draw text box. There it is. But we also need some other things. So we need not draw. What am I doing? Text box dot there it is. Text box key typed. So we'll just give it these variables. And I also believe we need mouse clicked. It's one of these. Yeah, mouse clicked. So I didn't actually talk about this. This is for handling mouse input that isn't like clicking a button. So you will most likely use this in a custom button rather than just in your GUI. But then, you know, I never know. There's so many different things you can do with GUIs that there's always a reason to use one of these. But it's just like key typed, apart from you've got mouse release and mouse click move. So it's like when you drag, and then of course is when the mouse is released, and mouse clicked is obviously when you first click the button. And I think that's everything. I didn't miss out anything for that. Text box has some. I mean, right now this doesn't do anything, but we can actually do some things here. So if we need the text that's inside this text box, so let's say we're saying enter a name for something, then we can get what the text inside the text box and use that for something, and check that it's focused. I'm pretty sure you can set the text. Yep. You can have disable text. That's interesting. You can as you can see, we can get the text that's selected, because you can select text in these text boxes. I guess you can't in this one, but you can in most of them. Where else has a text box? Open to LAN, maybe? No. Achievements doesn't. Resource packs? Nope. They're nowhere, are they? Snooper settings? Nope. I could just go to here, which doesn't actually allow you to select. That's weird. You can select them though. They do have selection option capabilities. It just doesn't seem to be able to do it. Anyway, we need to close the game to actually do this, but we're not gonna use that right now. In fact, we could say what do we need? We need, yeah, so either we say okay, so what I'm going to do here, I should probably explain what I'm doing. I thought I'd make it so when you type in this text box, you can change our title, which is somewhere here. So we could set that, and then it's going to make it so when you click the mouse to lose focus, but then that would actually also happen into here. Let's say if text box dot get text, first of all, is not empty, it won't change it if there's nothing in there. And if should we say if it's not focused? Yeah, because while it's focused, it won't change it, but then as soon as it loses focus, it does. And then we'll say title dot it's a string. Title equals text box dot get text. And we'd probably want to do this in the mouse button, because you can also use in fact, you know what's a better idea? Should we put this in update buttons, or should I make another one? I guess I'll make another one. Public void update text box, I guess, or text boxes, and I'll put it in there. And then in both of these, not update buttons, so every time a key or mouse button is pressed, it will check. It will do that check every time. So let's run up the game. So text boxes aren't as common in things, and are definitely way more complicated. For both of these, for both text boxes and GUI buttons, even, if we make a custom class, we can do a lot more, such as limiting what can be typed, or how many characters can be typed in a text box. We can limit it to just numbers. A bit more complicated, you'd have to basically check if you can if you can pass the string as an integer or whatever, or a float or double, depending on what numbers you want. And if you want to have it so you can only set the number to, I don't know, let's say you want 100 to be the highest thing you can type, then you need to make sure that it's less than 100, the string, rather than limiting it to being 3 numbers or something. Could also do that. But you could also limit. So you could just make it. It's probably started by now, isn't it? Yeah. But yeah, so if you want to render a custom text box, you can use the custom class as well. But I'll just go make a custom button because it will be very similar for a text box. So we have our GUI and a massive text box, probably bigger than we want it, and it's like off the screen, but that's fine. We can see that if we type now, there we go. Yep. Where's my mouse button? Is it flickering? That's weird. So it will set it as long as there's something here. I believe if you press enter, it loses. Maybe it doesn't. Okay. Whoops. Yeah, we can type into that, and we can actually use that for something. That's a good point. That's now messing with that. We draw that. Before that, we probably want to draw the tooltip last because of that lighting issue. Or we'd have to set the lighting, but I think it's easier just to do that. There we go. That's probably why the mouse is flickering, maybe. Now, of course, we can still change this. Yeah. So that button's kind of useless. We could actually repurpose that to be. I'll leave that. That's fine. That's gonna make it so you can't close it if it's not that. Should I say? So you have to type in closed for it to be a close in order for it to work. So if I do close, that didn't work because this didn't update. Yeah, let's do that. Update. Where's our method? Update text boxes. Update buttons. There we go. So that works. Let's change our button text to close, and then in action performed, say mc.displayGUI screen null, and that will just close the GUI. So if we don't make it, then it won't work, but if it is closed, then we can close it, and now it actually says close because we reset that. Obviously not something you'd ever want to do in a GUI because that would be very strange. You'd have to like type commands. That'd be weird to make things work. But that demonstrates how you can use text boxes, and you can use a button to say when you click the button instead, check that it is closed rather than enabling the button if it's closed. So we could always have it enabled but make it do nothing, but when you click it, check if the text box has closed in it, otherwise don't do anything. That would work as well. And in fact, most cases you probably want to do that, because if you say you got a thing where you say enter a name, and then you type the name, then maybe you want to have an accept or an OK button. Then when you click the OK button, it then sets the name of the thing that you're doing. Now, what I haven't actually, which is this isn't going to be part of the tutorial. This will be a tutorial in the future. That's quite complicated, so it's going to be. It's an important topic though. Packets. So if we want our GUI to do things interact with things on the server, we need to introduce packets so we can send data from the client to the server, and you can also do it the other way around. So if we wanted to set let's say we have a block that is a tile entity, another thing we haven't done yet. But let's say we have a block, or even, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Let's say our block here, yeah, let's say we made it so when you right click this block it opens that GUI, and then we say set the name of the block or something, and then we click accept, and then we want this block to now have a different, or even the item, have the item change the name of the tooltip or something, then we need to actually make the button send, when you click it, send a packet to then say on the server, we've changed the name of the thing, please change it, basically. But yeah, that's going to be a future tutorial, and will have many other uses. Packets are actually incredibly important, but we haven't needed them yet, and we won't do for a while, so I don't know when that tutorial will be. I've still got the rest of these GUI tutorials to do. So, now that we've done that, we've got our text box, we've got a thing, but what we haven't done yet is actually made, so I never actually mentioned this. So, when we right click, you may notice when we actually use it on a block, we don't open this GUI. Now, that is because we've said, no, not here, on item use, it does this. So this will actually override this. Otherwise, if we're not using, if we haven't got it over a block, the right click will work, which is the same reason why it doesn't say right clicked. I might have already mentioned that in the previous tutorial, in the item 1, but oh well. So our GUI, that's interesting. Okay, that is pretty simple to fix. So notice that when we open our GUI, this button works even though it shouldn't. That's basically because by default it is, yeah, okay, we want to update the buttons here in our init GUI. Pretty simple. It's a good idea to do that. Basically, update buttons is a helpful method that I think you should probably make a method like this if you're going to make a GUI with buttons, because unless you're not changing the state of the buttons, because it's a central thing that needs to be updated in many places, like whenever you click a button or when you open the GUI. Otherwise, you're going to be setting the enabled to true and false in all sorts of different places, or if you're setting the visibility. So having this one method is incredibly useful. So let's actually get to custom buttons. So this is easy. We just need to make a new class, and we'll say GUI button tutorial. And then we're going to say extends GUI button. And we don't have our constructor, but that's fine. Just alt insert constructor. And we can use either constructor. We probably want to specify the width and height. Most like, actually, no we don't. We're not going to give the, we're going to say, because we're using this fixed texture, what am I doing? We're going to use this one where you don't have to specify the width and height, because we're going to use this button here. So zoom right into this. This button here is how big? I mean, you could make it bigger than the actual texture. You could do that if you want it to be able to click like slightly outside of it. We won't do that just because it might be a bit weird. But we want our button to always be this. The height and width needs to be the same, so it's 16 by 14. So in this, we're going to use our width and height in the super here. So 16 by 14. There we go. So we've given it the width and height, and we haven't got it in the constructor because we don't need that, because we're having it like that by default. So this is actually almost done, surprisingly. We need to override the draw button, which if we go look inside this, so Control the U to view that, we can see it only draws if it's visible. We probably want to have this check as well. And then it's doing all this, so it's drawing the string. We're not actually going to have a string, so shall we change that? Yes, we will give that a blank string, because this is a button that doesn't have text, and then we won't give it to the constructor. It still needs it because it's part of GUI button. Oh, great. Let's turn this down as well. And turn off weather. Weather's annoying. Ah, lovely. So, we have... Basically, we need to make something like this, but different. Now you can see that okay. So they're in this method. They're drawing the texture, but they're also changing the color based on whether it's hovered and enabled, which is definitely a way to do it. We're just going to change the texture based on whether it's hovered. So, let's... What kind of... Oh, it's a button, okay. And that's just checking if it's hovered or not. Okay, that... It's not a bad idea, I guess. Bit of a weird... Oh no, yeah, it is a... Okay, yep. That makes sense. You can see that they're doing a very similar thing to what I did with the hover there. Anyway, let's actually draw it. So, we want to use our texture. Now, we could make another resource location, or something I like to do is give our button a parent. So, let's just say GUI screen parent. Now, the reason I do this is, okay, let's have, first of all, let's have a parent equals, wait, let's do this dot parent equals parent. So we've got our parent variable in here, and basically what we're going to do is when we add the button here, we need to give it the parent, which is going to let us access stuff from our GUI. So, if we, of course, we do GUI button extends GUI, so we do get some of the methods from here, like drawing the textured modal rect and the string and everything. But we don't get the GUI screen stuff, and we don't get any of the stuff that we put in here, such as our resource location, which we already have there, so we might as well reuse it. So if I do, well, first of all, we probably want to do GUI tutorial GUI, I guess. Doesn't really matter. And cast this as GUI tutorial. No, not GUI. Get rid of that import, don't need it. So now that we've got our parent here to use, we're still going to check if visible, because that's a good idea, because we want our visible variable to actually affect it. Otherwise it will do nothing when we set visible to false or true, and that would be silly. Of course, if you don't care about that, just don't bother, but we'll keep that there. So, we will, first of all, do we have MC? Yep. Bind texture, parent, no, not parent, GUI dot texture. There we go. So we don't have to make a new variable. We could do, but not going to do that. Now, I probably should check that, no, never mind. No, I should. Yeah, okay. That's to make this more safe, so if we use this on a different GUI, we're going to say if... Nope, not even going to do that. Let's say... Actually, I'm not going to use a parent. We could use a parent, but I think for this case, we're not going to bother. If your button only needs to work on one GUI, then it's fine. Otherwise, this isn't going to work too well. We'll make it universal. Why not? So let's just say, let's just copy the... I mean, we could make this static, but nah, not going to do that. There we go. So we're just going to say texture, and then draw the actual texture. So, well, let's make some variables. Right. Actually, we'll put these out here because it's better. So we have our button width, which is 16, and our button, why did I do that? Button height, which is 14, and we are also going to use a pos x, or rather, no, I'll just call it u and v. So if you don't know what u and v are, that's basically x and y for textures. So this position on the texture is essentially u and v. So u is x, v is y. So in this case we've got, this is 175, so our u is going to be 175, and then the hover texture is this one down here. At least I think so. So by default, our non-hovered one is, of course you could just change the color, but we've got two textures. If you want it to actually change texture, then that's how you do it. So our u is, or x, is 175. Our v, or y, is just 0. Or actually, it should be 1, I guess, if we want it down here. Yeah, 1, okay. But then, when we want to change to this texture, our u is still the same, but our v is now down here, which is... what is that? That's 18 pixels, so it's 18. So, by default, it is 175 and 1. This is gonna... and then we just change these variables to change which texture it is. So, let's draw the textured modal rect. We will check if it's hovered in a sec, but let's first just get it. So our x and y is x position, y position, so it's the position of the button. And you can see here, min u, min v, min u, max u and max v, so that's the width and height essentially. We have u, v, width, height. And that will draw the button texture just how we want it. Since we have two buttons here, we have the back, and well, we have like the next and previous essentially. I won't bother with doing both, but you just want to you either make 2, or you could make it negative, couldn't you? You could say that the width is minus the width, and that should work, I think. I haven't actually tried that. In fact, not 100% sure that'll work. But probably the best way to do it is just having 2. In fact, you could have a variable in here as well, saying like, let's say is next or something, like a boolean, and if it's true, then use this texture, like have the u as 175, otherwise do 175 plus 16, well, plus 17, and have that, yeah. So, hope that makes sense. Now, we need to actually make it work with hovered, so that'll draw the button fine, but it won't look any different. If you don't need it to change when hovered over, then this is pretty much all you need to do. If we want to change the behavior of the when you actually click on it, then we can override that as well, which we can do mouse pressed. We need to check that the mouse position is right and everything, and then do something. Otherwise, we can do it in action performed in our GUI. Really depends on what your button does. But in this case, we don't need to change that. We're just going to make that work in our GUI. So let's do the hovering. So we have, I believe we actually do have a boolean. Now, I don't think this is set by anything. By default, I think we do have to. We have to manually do this. Manually check that the mouse is over it. That's why I'm saying manually a lot. We have to do this ourselves. So you can see we can get hover state, but that's not gonna work. So we're just gonna do basically this check that we did for the tooltip is exactly the same. And in fact, most of this is the same. Yes, so instead of pos x, it's x position and y position. And we'll just say hovered equals true, else hovered equals false. You can even put this in a separate method, but nah, I won't bother. No, it's fine. And then we just need to check if hovered u equals v equals, what was it, 18, wasn't it? Yeah, 18. Else v equals 1. So we're just changing the position that it uses, which we can. In this case, we don't need to change the u at all, but we would if we were checking if we wanted to combine this as both these buttons, like rather than having 2 separate classes for the arrow facing this way and the arrow facing that way. Now we could also, if you don't want to have a texture, but rather just have a button that is just text, it's going to be mostly the same, apart from you just draw a string, and then instead of using, and then set the button width to the string width, and of course you can use your button text as the string. And you can basically just copy what it's doing here. Although that centers it, and maybe you don't want it centered, but you can. It's, you know, it's easy to do. But I think that's all we need to do for the button. So actually putting this button in our GUI is super easy. So like we have a GUI button, we're going to have a GUI button tutorial, and this is going to be, I'll just call it arrow. And then we will add this, we'll say that's just one. Arrow is got the ID of 1. And then button list dot add arrow equals new GUI button tutorial, and then arrow, and then just the X and Y. Let's just put this 100 100 so it's out of the way of the text field. And since we are manually drawing our buttons, let's draw that as well. Arrow, whoops, draw a button. Now, of course, if you use the super, you wouldn't have to do both of these. You can just use the super. But of course, if you just have the super, let's say you wanted to draw this one after this or something, but you wanted to draw this button before it, then you definitely need to do that. But I think for most people, just drawing all the buttons at the same point makes sense. So let's. We're gonna have to restart the game, I believe. So with a text field, you just make a button, make a class that extends GUI text field, and it's a lot of the same. But there's other things you may want to override, such as the key typed, so you can change how that works. Although you do have to manually then make sure the arrow keys, like check for the arrow keys so you can move the cursor position, which is pretty easy to do. I mean, you can look at the class and see. If we go into text field, let's find, where is it? Text box key typed. So you can see it doesn't do anything if it's not focused. If key combo control A, I guess select everything, right? And then we can, copy and stuff. And cut. Here it is. So the key codes are just numbers. That's a bit annoying. Now, what are these? I believe you can find out what these are in the keyboard class, but rather they're using numbers, which is a bit silly, because we can do. This is launched, so let's just load that up. If we actually wanted to check, we can do keyboard, and I think it's from LWJGL, and then it's maybe it's not. No, it is. Yeah, key left. Let's say. Then we say. If key code equals that, that's how we'd want to check the keys rather than using those the numbers, which I'm not really sure why they do that, but maybe it's performance saving. I have no clue. But here it is, and you can see I hover over it and it goes lighter, and when we click it, it makes a noise, but we haven't actually made it do anything. So if we want to make it do something, we just add a case here. So arrow, and I don't know what this would do. Let's say new GUI. What should we open up? Should I just open inventory? Does that take something? Oh, it does. Okay, MC player. And that will open the inventory. So into we have this lovely custom button, which now that we've made that class, basically you don't have to modify this. And if you want to have many of the buttons, you can add them in your GUI here and set all the positions here. So that's pretty cool. If you want to change the sound, they actually have a method for that. Play press sound, there it is, and we could change that, but we haven't done the sounds yet. But we can see here it plays that, which I've never actually seen this way of playing sound be used before, but that obviously works. We're not going to override that, no point. So this is a really long tutorial, and I think we're pretty much at the end. One last thing. If you want to translate your GUI stuff, you need to manually localize it. So let's say we want to localize this tooltip. Well, first of all, we need to have a string for it. So let's say we have GUI tooltip. Yeah. If we actually want this text to be localized, then we need to do I18n, which there's two different ones. Yeah, that's the right one. So make sure it's the one from this one, the client one. And then format. So there's actually more that you can do here than you expect. If we just do that, if we have to reset the game for this to work, I believe. Maybe we don't. Let's say let's just add a new thing here. GUI.tooltip. We'd have to do this for every single piece of text on GUI, by the way. And then say, oh, why did it do that? It just refreshed all the icon. So there we go. I'll put the exclamation mark just like we had. That will translate it. But let's say we have a more complicated piece of text, like, I don't know. Let's say you have a thing that says something, and in the middle of it you insert a variable. There we go. So it did actually translate it, I think, or should have. I'm guessing it. Oh no, I'm looking at the wrong thing. Yeah, so I need to actually restart the game for that to work, I believe. So, or maybe reload the resource pack. Let's see. F3 and T will do that. This is actually probably what I need to do. And there we go. Oh god. What is going on? Oh, there we go. Now it's done it. There we go. Yep, see, it's translated. So we'd have to do that for the button text and everything. But this also takes more arguments. So it takes as many as it needs. You can see it has object ... which means you can basically have as many as you want. So what we need to do is, well, okay. Here's an example. We have a string here that says what could we use? The world is, well, okay, let's say we have the dimension ID is, and then we say MC world provider get dimension. Yeah, that's how you get the dimension ID. Hooray. And we want to translate all of that. Of course, this doesn't work. We're going to put this in here. Why not? You know what would make more sense? If I put like the stack, something to do with the item stack. But oh well, it doesn't matter. It's an example. Who cares? Now, if we did this, and we decided to translate this part, and then this part separately, that would work in English, but what happens if if you use a language where the word order's different? Well, that's gonna not make any sense. So, rather than that, we have GUI, let's say, tooltip 2. Not a great name. You probably want to save these strings as well in like some separate class like animal static and final, so you know you can access these translation strings. And then we'll say the dimension ID goes as another parameter there. And then in our language, this kind of partly become a localization tutorial, but that's fine. It's all part of the GUI. We'd have to do this in some other places as well, such as like chat messages and pretty much anything that doesn't get translated by default, like blocks and items and created tabs. They do, so you don't have to do that for those. So we have our GUI.tooltip2, and then we say the dimension ID is. Now this is where we'd have our dimension ID, which, if I need to remember this correctly, is, I think I got that right. So this number, basically, if you had another variable here that you want to insert, so let's say you had like let's say you just had a 2 there, that second one would then be a 2 there. I think I got that right. I have to make sure. It's a bit of a weird thing to remember. Hooray. And assuming I did that right, so let's refresh that first, and then this is going to take ages to refresh. It's almost done. There we go. The dimension ID is 0. Hooray! And that is right. The overworld has a dimension ID of 0. So that makes sense. So I did get that right. So, oh, well, whoops. Yeah, but where basically this acts as if it's the variable. So when putting this here, imagine this is the dimension ID variable. So wherever you put it, it's going to show. And if you have a second one, let's say you just had it, you could even put it at the start, you know, like anywhere you like. It doesn't have to be in the same order. Just, let's say you had that, you wanted to have that random 2 that we added at the end before. That would show there. So that's how you deal with those translations. So it will make sense if another language is like, it's like you say the ID first and then ID dimension or something, you know, whatever. Then it can make sense in that language, that made up language that I just made up. So yeah, that's everything, I think. I'd say there's probably a little bit more that you can do that's kind of way more advanced. Like a scroll bar is pretty difficult to do, but mainly is just a custom button that then you could use mouse dragged probably. And then actually having the item scroll is a bit more difficult. There's this thing called GL scissor, which basically you specify a region and anything inside that region will show, but if it goes outside of the scissor region, it's not there. That is really, really difficult to use because it uses coordinates where it starts at the bottom left, not the top left, like everything else. So it's like really confusing because you've got to try and work out the coordinates from that. But other than that, I think this is everything. Maybe. Well, next tutorial is going to be HUD GUIs, which will not be as long as this, because most of it we've kind of covered here. It's just the same thing, but rather than rendering as a GUI like this that we open, it's just going to render on the GUI, like on the HUD all the time. May go into making a bar that you can change. We'll see. Probably. But that's going to be nowhere near as long as this. But, finally. This is a long tutorial, but I hope it helps. There's not a lot of good tutorials on GUIs, I feel. And it's been like years now that I've been modding, and it's taken a while for me to actually get to this point with GUIs where I understand them this well. So I hope this is very helpful. Now, if I did miss out something quite major, I'll probably make another tutorial explaining that, whatever I missed. Because this GUIs are such a broad topic that there's probably something I missed, maybe. Anyway, I'll see you in the next tutorial. Thank you for watching. Goodbye. If this video helped you, then give it a like, and if you want to see more, subscribe, and if you want to support me, go to patreon.com/wehavecookies56.